There's several elements to feedback. One is your mental models about feedback, and the other is a skill. So why don't most people give each other? I mean, when I stand in front of executives, from not just at Leaders in Tech, but from all the organizations I've worked in, and I say, how many of you have always worked in an environment where everybody told each other the truth? Nobody ever raises their hand. A few. Once in a while, you get one or two. How many of you live in family systems where everybody tells each other the truth? Fewer hands go up. So then I say, so what is that about? If feedback is such a gift and people think it's such an important thing and it's the only way you help others develop, why is it so rare? Well, it's rare because we hold these mental models, these beliefs and assumptions that if I give you feedback, you're going to get mad at me, or you're going to think I'm a creep, or you're going to think, something bad of me, or worse yet, you're going to turn the tables on me and come at me with something. And so if we go into a conversation with the assumption that it's going to go bad, it's going to be a pile of doo-doo, then first of all, we don't do it. We don't do it as often. We don't do it until we're really worked up, which we're much less likely to be good at doing. And we don't get any better.
Welcome to Tools for Tech Leaders, a podcast for C-suite executives and tech decision makers who are excited to connect with peers and thought leaders, sharing ideas and frameworks and tools that resonate with them and that are useful. I'm your host, Ian Tien, CEO and co-founder of Mattermost, and today we're thrilled to be joined by Dr. Carole Robin. Dr. Robin is co-author of Connect, Building Exceptional Relationships with Family, Friends, and Colleagues, and was a key faculty member at Stanford's Graduate School of Business, where she was one of the contributors of the legendary course Interpersonal Dynamics, affectionately known as Touchy Feely. And Carole is widely known in the Stanford community as the queen of Touchy Feely. This course has inspired a generation of Stanford leaders who believe that culture, communication, trust, and execution can be even more foundational to business success than the best laid strategic plans. In 2017, Carole left Stanford to co-found a nonprofit, Leaders in Tech, which brings the Touchy Feely curriculum to CEOs, company founders, C-suite execs of pre-IPO tech organizations, and it's been an enormously successful program. You can find out more at leadersintech.org, and we'll include that in the show notes as well. Carole, it's such a pleasure to have you join us today.
Well, I'm just thrilled to be here, Ian. And one of the things that I enjoy doing most these days, in addition to teaching, is having a chance to talk about what I teach, which in and of itself is a way of teaching. So thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, and it's we met a long time ago for both of us. So I was, I did in business school the Touchy Feely curriculum, and I would say that, just to be honest, it was rocky, right? It was like, it's the thing that you do not because you enjoy it, because it'll have impact. And then over a decade later, after business school and running my own company, I did the Leaders in Tech program again. And, it was a decade. I was probably a little rusty. I probably didn't remember all the things, but I remember how much impact I got out of it. I also remember how uncomfortable it was. So I'll say that the second time you do it is a lot easier, right? And it's like the other people that are just kind of going through the ups and downs, and you're like watching a little bit from outside. And for me, I can appreciate it from a different level because it was the second time. And there's things that I missed the first time that I kind of, that's what that meant, because it kind of comes at you so fast. So maybe I'll start off with where I was sort of like 15 years ago, which was, why take it, right? Like, why do I, isn't strategy and Excel spreadsheets what a business school, person should be doing? Like, why would you even think about this concept of authentic leadership? Shouldn't we just be all puffed up and leading and have lots of slogans? Why do people want to take this course?
Well, let's back up for a moment. And some of the first things you mentioned, which are very necessary skills in business, accounting, finance, marketing, strategy, we might call those the hard skills. And we might call Touchy Feely and even things like leadership courses the soft skills. And soft skills turn out to be a lot harder than hard skills. So in fact, sometimes the hardest skills, partly because we think they sound so obvious. And then it turns out that it's actually not nearly as obvious as we thought, to figure out how do I create a really functional, strong relationship with you that's different than the relationship I'm going to create with the person sitting right next to you, even though I want them both to be strong and functional. So it's the opposite of one size fits all. It's the opposite of predictable, which is why so many people are uncomfortable. And the bottom line, the reason this course is so popular at the Stanford Business School, it's not hidden away in some psych department, is that people do business with people in the end. They don't do business with ideas or products or machines or money or tactics. They do business with people. And so getting the people part right is a really critical part of the success of any leader. Furthermore, they call it touchy feely because of the emphasis on feelings, which we can get into, and learning how to talk about feelings and how to express feelings in service of developing stronger relationships. And what happens when we do that is that we create more functional relationships. And rather than having only task be what we talk about, then I'm talking to a whole human being. And leaders need to learn how to inspire and motivate and encourage and challenge. Those things actually require feelings. You can't just do that in the absence of feelings. So that's kind of a long answer to your question, but I think those are all aspects of why take it. Why take it as an MBA student? I mean, I think 80% of the MBAs take the class. Many of them feeling the way you felt about it, which is, I don't know about this class, but everybody else says I should take it, or it's probably good for me. But also, I love the fact that you went back and did it 10 years later, because the receptor sites for the knowledge are much more evolved 10 years later. So you might have heard something 10 years ago, but now it makes sense to you why that's something for you to listen to, whereas at the time it seemed kind of theoretical. This now is like, oh yeah, I get exactly why this is what will help me be more successful in my job as a leader.
Yeah, 100%. I remember when I started this concept of, vulnerability, of authenticity, I was an engineer coming in and I was just sort of like, well, why would you have emotions in the way? That will make your decisions all clouded. But the truth is, like, the emotions really do affect all your decisions. It affects your perception, it affects data, it affects, how people like actually can get the information to flow back and forth. If someone's in a bad mood or someone's got their mind's on something else, they can't actually hear it. So at the same time, you've got this kind of like, imposter syndrome, I've got to be a leader, I've got to be strong, I have to like lead people the right direction. How do you think about like balancing that authentic self, that need to earn trust with the team that you're leading, and then being vulnerable to say, hey, things aren't perfect, and being open to feedback? Like, how do you balance those?
So it's a wonderful question. Embedded in what you just asked me is a mental model, an assumption, a belief somehow that being more transparent, not completely, but a little more transparent, being what we call authentic, and we can come back and actually define that, is somehow weak. When we ask people, what are the first words that come to mind for you when you think vulnerable? Weak, fragile, easy to take advantage of, all kinds of activating, not particularly positive mental models. But once in a while, when I ask a room full of executives, what's the first word that comes to mind when I say vulnerable? Somebody will say courageous. Somebody else will say strong. So one of the things that happens in Touchy Feely, whether it's at Lit or at the business school, is that people discover that when a fellow participant is willing to make themselves a little bit more vulnerable, they are seen as stronger, not weaker. They are seen as more compelling, not less compelling. In fact, that's the question I ask my students and Lit participants to sit in when they're going through the program is, why should somebody follow you? Because one way to learn about leadership is to study what other leaders have done. And okay, there might be some lessons to be learned there, and you're not them. So why should somebody follow you is the question to sit in. And one of the reasons people will follow you is because they trust you. And they cannot trust you if they don't think that you're telling the truth. If they think you're lying to them, they are way less likely to trust you. So now I do want to make the point that there's authenticity and authenticity. So there's what we call appropriate authenticity. If I'm the VP of marketing and we've lost share for the last 3 months, and I stand up in front of the troops and say, we're crushing it out there, I'm actually going to have less credibility, and people are going to be less inclined to follow me. If I stand up there and say, so yeah, 3rd month in a row, we've lost share, no surprises, you've all seen the numbers, I have no idea what's going on. I don't know what we should do about it. And I'm not even sure I should be your VP of marketing. That might be authentic, but it's not appropriate. And that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is, okay, gang, 3rd month in a row, we've lost share. No surprise. I wish I could stand here and tell you exactly why and exactly what we should do about it. I have some ideas. I've got some thoughts about what we might want to do. I've never needed you and your input more. Which is the leader you would like to follow of those three? The one that pretends everything is fine, the one that admits things are not fine and asks for your help and does not abdicate the fact that they, ultimately still have some choices and decisions to make and knowledge to bring to bear on the situation.
Yep, excellent. I think that's a very common case, right? So, hey, things are going, in our company, we have things that are going well, not going well, and what are next actions? So we really want to hear both. And actually at our company, thanks to probably Touchy Feely and some of the curriculum, self-awareness is actually one of our core values. So we've been really lucky in that. And, one of the priorities is how do you teach these managers? Because not everyone gets to go to like a business school and have this training. And we actually have sent multiple execs to leaders in tech. So it's a great product and we continue to use it. How do you think about expanding that out from the leadership team into sort of middle management? How do you think about sort of modeling the right behaviors, cascading things out?
I love your question. So in addition to leaders in tech, and by the way, we're expanding what we offer into Who every day because we have many executives and CEOs who say, but what about the rest of my people? So we're adding more and more programs to our constellation of offerings. It's also the reason David Bradford and I were talked into writing a book, because the editor from Penguin Random House came to us and said, how come there's this class that thousands of students for decades have said was worth the entire price of tuition and there's no book? And we said, because you actually have to engage with other people in order to become interpersonally competent. You're not going to just read about it. And he said, but what about all the people that aren't lucky enough and privileged enough to go to Stanford Business School? And that's your question. And that's when we decided to look at ourselves and say, well, I guess we're going to have to write a book. Now, I'm not saying the book is the answer, but the book in conjunction with other things can be. For example, at the book website, connectandrelate.com, there are a bunch of free downloadable resources. Create your own learning group. Everybody get a book, walk through the deepen your learning sections together at the end of each chapter. Now that takes a little bit more discipline. It does take some self-direction, but bring it to your team. And as a leader who has gone through Touchy Feely and has some experiential version of it, you can bring even more to bear on doing the create your own learning group activities that are suggested. The website has a downloadable, again, free self-assessment. Take a self-assessment and then give it to like 3 or 4 people in your life and then compare how they see you to how you see you. Nothing is more stunning than to think, I thought I was a pretty good listener. And look at this. 3 people told me one thing I could really do to be more effective is be a better listener. So there are, a number of different resources out there for those who want to. And having said that, it's not easy. It's not 3 quick steps to becoming more competent. That book might have sold 1 million copies. Ours sold 120,000. But that's because we refuse to narrow it or oversimplify it to here are the 3 steps. Like really human beings are more complicated than that. You really think that's all it's going to take? I don't think so. So it takes discipline, it takes work. And then you got to ask yourself, how much do you really think it's important? Both professionally and personally, which at Stanford we learned both professional and personal interpersonal competence are hallmarks or required to succeed in both arenas, right? I get predictably hundreds of emails and calls and visits from former students and lit participants. Many of them are already CEOs and founders, but former students who say, I just became a CEO. I owe it all to you or your class. And that we might predict that. I just raised my 3rd round. I owe it all to what I learned from you. But, the ones that are most meaningful to me, Ian, and the ones that I get just as many, if not more of, are, I'm pretty sure your class just saved my marriage. I just reconciled my relationship with my brother, who I hadn't talked to for 2 years, because he voted for the other person. So I always thought the course could have been called Connecting Across Differences instead of Interpersonal Dynamics, because it's easy to connect with people who think just like us, who see the world the same way we do, that's easy. But what if we don't have the luxury of living in a world where everybody sees things the way we do? So what do we do then? Decide not to have any relationship with anybody else? That's not very functional. It's pretty hard to get through life. You got to get You have to end up in a pretty isolated hermit-like place with just a few people, and it's a choice, but I don't think it's a very viable one.
Yeah, excellent. Completely agree. Thank you, Carole. And well, you mentioned a lot of things there, and I'd love to sort of unpack some of them. Starting with, those the survey that you get that it sounds like you're talking about in terms of that self-assessment. Asking your peers.
You got one when you went to Lit. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And I found that super useful. Even before we stepped in the door, we had that survey, and just asking someone for feedback. You're like, ooh, who am I going to ask? And you feel all those like, oh, I'm kind of worried. Like, what are they going to say? And they're going to put it down. And how are they going to score me? But ultimately, they're doing it they're doing it from a really well-meaning place, and you get that data. So I thought that was one tool that even before the program, and it sounds like you can even get these just online, that can be really impactful. I'd love to talk about some of the tools that I found really impactful, and maybe we can talk a little about them. I think the net. The concept of the net was something that I use all the time. Can you tell us, how do you teach about the net?
We're going to see that there are two people, but there are three different what we call realities. In any conversation between two people, there are actually three realities. Typically, the way this is displayed is on the left, there's reality number one. And for the purposes of our discussion, we're going to say that's a guy, some random guy. And then I'm going to give you an example. And he has his intent, the way he sees the world, what his needs are, etc. Then there's whatever that guy does, and that is reality number two. So his is reality number one. Whatever he does, whatever behaviors he engages in or doesn't, verbal or nonverbal, is reality number two. Then there is the impact that those behaviors have on, let's call it a woman, in reality number three. And so in that reality, that woman is sitting with her needs, the way she sees the situation, and her intent. And the only reality known to these two people is the one in the middle. Whatever he did, he has no idea what impact it had on her. She has no idea what his intent was until he says so. So they both know whatever anybody watching the conversation would have learned in a video. Now we have this picture of a metaphorical net that lives between reality number one at the edge of his and reality number two. And that's to differentiate, as we're talking about her, that there is a whole bunch of stuff she doesn't know about him. And that's on his side of the net, So she only knows what he did and what the impact was on her. But the problem that most people run into, in the way that, especially when they try to give each other, quote, feedback, and I'll put that in quotes because very few people do that very well, because very few people understand this model. What happens is, and I'll give you the classic example, it's one I've used, often because it illustrates the point so well. We're going to go way back in time because at the time I was home with an infant and a 2-year-old. And my husband was a big-time executive in Silicon Valley, and he would come home from work, and he would collapse on the chair in the family room, and he'd pick up the newspaper, because in those days we still read newspapers. I am that old. And he would start reading. And I would hear him from the back of the house, and I'd be like, oh my God, finally an adult to talk to. And I would run into the living room, and I'd say, oh my God, you're home. Guess what happened today? You won't believe what happened today. I went to that new nursery school. It didn't even open yet. It's already closed. It's already full. What is wrong with us? I don't want to raise kids in Palo Alto. This is a terrible place. And that's reality. So that's what I'm saying. But then I would say, as he picked up the newspaper and said, mm-hmm. And in fact, first time he wouldn't even make eye contact. He'd be like, uh-huh. I'd say, you're not listening. Now, when I say you're not listening, I am over the net. I am in his reality. I don't know whether he's listening or not, by the way. And I feel that you're not listening doesn't have a single feeling word in it and is the same thing. It means the same thing. You're not listening. So does that make him more receptive to a conversation with me or less? Then it gets worse because he responds by saying, yeah, you went to that new nursery school and it hasn't opened yet and you're all worked up. Now I get even more upset. And I say, how can you be so insensitive? I'm over the net again. How can you not care? Until he says, I don't care, I don't know whether he cares or not. I am over the net. Every one of those, imputing a motive, making an attribution, thinking you know what's going on for the other person, those are all over the net. And so the more effective way to have the conversation is to stay on my side of the net, which means I say, honey, when you come home, and I've been starved for an adult to interact with, and I speak to you about something I'm worked up about, and the only response I get is either a nonverbal kind of grunt or words repeated to me with no eye contact. That's what's behaviorally specific. That's what anybody watching the video would say happened. I don't feel heard. I don't feel heard is entirely on my side of the net, my reaction. And when I don't feel heard, I feel hurt and I feel distanced. Again, entirely on my side of the net. And I'm telling you this because I want to be there for you in a way that it's harder for me to be if I don't feel heard. That, by the way, is the way one gives feedback. Here's the behavior, here's the impact it had on me, and here's my intent in telling you. All on my side of the net.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally remember that coming up so many times in the curriculum, and it was like it's so important because it's so easy to mess up because like you don't even know you're messing up. It's like, what? I'm sharing my feelings.
That's right, because most of the time it's not a feeling. If you start a sentence with I feel that or I feel like, you're almost guaranteed to be over the net because what you're expressing is an opinion or a thought. It's grammatically in English impossible to express a feeling if you start with I feel that or I feel like. I feel, pull out the vocabulary of feelings, which is in the appendix of the book, is a handout in every course. Most of our leaders in tech, CEO founders have them in every conference room. They have them posted on their cork boards. They have them laminated because I feel, insert feeling word is like, I feel that you're difficult. Well, not a feeling. What are you feeling? I feel like you don't, like this doesn't matter to you. Not a feeling. Over and over again. And talk about a discipline. It's really hard to break yourself of the habit of expressing feelings, expressing what you think are feelings that are actually opinions. And sticking with feelings is very hard because you need a vocabulary, and that's why we have to develop a vocabulary of feelings because most people are so out of touch with what they're feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I noticed after having that training is when I'm in a group situation and I see someone rub the other person the wrong way, I'm like, oh, I can see it a lot more clearly now. And then you have to you got to figure out what to do. Can you share a little about sort of detecting those, sometimes we call them pinches or crunches. Like what is the context behind that in the course?
That's so the idea behind a pinch is that people do things that are going to annoy you. I mean, no relationship is annoyance free. So everybody does something that eventually, is mildly annoying. So let's say that you and I are colleagues, and let's say that I've asked you to, you've asked me to do something for you as a favor. I've been like, no problem, Ian, delighted to do that for you. Actually, I'll give you a real example. David Bradford, my colleague, longtime colleague and mentor, when we were both at Stanford, comes to me and says, Carole, will you take my class on Wednesday? Because I've got, an opportunity to go give a talk and I'd love to be able to do that. And I was like, sure, David, no problem. So then let's say that a few weeks later, he comes to me and says, it's my grandson's birthday. I got to fly out the day before. Would you take my class again? Sure, no problem. But now let's say that I need some help with the design and I'm having trouble noodling. And I go to him and I say, would you help me with, think through this? Because I'm kind of struggling. And he says, oh, actually, sorry, I don't have the time right now. Now I feel a little pinch because I have turned myself into a bit of a pretzel to be responsive to him. So I kind of have an expectation that he might do the same with me. Now, it's only a pinch. It's a small thing. And I have a choice at that point. I can let it go. And because I'm not advocating that you should address every single pinch. But so let's say I say, well, he's busy, no problem. Let's say that I come to him again at another time. And I say, so, now I've got a different one that I'm struggling with. And now let's say he doesn't have time again. This, by the way, never happened, but let's say it had. That pinch gets a little bigger. And now, the way to know that it's time to raise it is when I am now having a reaction that doesn't just go away. It's not something that I just say, it's not a big deal. Now it stays with me a little bit, or it gets a little bigger. The time to address it is while it's still a pinch, because if it happens a third time, now I'm pissed and it becomes a crunch. So the whole idea behind pinches is and this is central to the book and really to Touchy Feely, is that we're equipped with two antennas. One is an antenna on what's going on for us internally. That's why I love that self-awareness is such a big part of your value system. Because if I don't know what's going on for me, I don't realize that I got a little bit annoyed. And then I get a little more annoyed, and then I get a little more, and by the time I actually realize that something's going on, I'm way past a little annoyed. And then the way I react is way bigger. And you're like, you never even knew there was a problem. So isn't it more fair to address it early on before it becomes a crunch? And so that's a really critical antenna to being interpersonally competent, which feels a little counterintuitive, but the better you know yourself and the more you are in touch with what's going on for you, the more you're going to be able to manage interpersonally. The other antenna, of course, is picking up what might be going on for the other person. So two antenna, intra and inter, to pick up what's going on for the other person.
Yep, excellent. And then as you think about, okay, now we've got the crunches, we've got the pinches, we have the net, we have all the other things that are going in the interpersonal dynamics. How do you sort of, I'd love to talk a little bit, not only feedback, but, how do you sort of like disarm some of these issues we've talked about, right? There's a whole bunch of problems that kind of come up, friction points. So, how do you think about feedback as a framework and the other sort of behaviors you need to operate really well now that we know all that's going on?
So there's several elements to feedback. One is your mental models about feedback, and the other is a skill. So why don't most people give each other? I mean, when I stand in front of executives, from not just leaders in tech, but from all the organizations I've worked in, and I say, how many of you have always worked in an environment where everybody told each other the truth? Nobody ever raises their hand. A few. Once in a while, you get one or two. How many of you live in family systems where everybody tells each other the truth? Fewer hands go up. So then I say, so what is that about? If feedback is such a gift and people think it's such an important thing and it's the only way you help others develop, why is it so rare? Well, it's rare because we hold these mental models, these beliefs and assumptions that if I give you feedback, you're going to get mad at me, or you're going to think I'm a creep, or you're going to think, something bad of me, or worse yet, you're going to turn the tables on me and come at me with something. And so if we go into a conversation with the assumption that it's going to go bad, it's going to be a pile of doo-doo, then first of all, we don't do it. And we don't do it as often. We don't do it until we're really worked up, which we're much less likely to be good at doing. And we don't get any better at doing it. So instead, if we've got that internal antenna picking up that there's something going on that I'm a little bit annoyed at, and I say something about it while staying on my side of the net, which is the skill part, then I learned that feedback can actually build relationship. It can actually create a stronger relationship because I will trust you. I will trust that you will tell me the truth. And not because you're mean or you want me to feel bad, but because you're invested in me and you don't want me to keep doing things that are actually problematic. So as leaders, one of the most important things we can do is role model giving and receiving feedback as a cornerstone of strong professional relationships. And usually, we stick with task feedback. This report was, good, but when it comes to interpersonal feedback, most people just kind of bury that. And the thing to think about is, what are some of the assumptions you're making, and where do they come from? And so often when we teach the model of the net and feedback and really the whole module on feedback, we start by saying, you're not going to get better at it by not doing it, so you're going to have to do it. Don't pick the most difficult person in your life who you've never been able to give feedback to in a way that ever resulted well. Pick somebody in your life that you already have a reasonable relationship with and try giving them a piece of feedback on something that they're doing that is in some way problematic for you. And do it using the net model. When you do X, I feel Y. And I'm telling you this because. And then see what happens, because what happens then is the purpose of constructive feedback is to move into problem solving. When you show up to meetings repeatedly late, I feel, insert feeling, worried, annoyed, disappointed. And I'm telling you this because the more it happens, the more annoyed, disappointed, worried I get. And before I start jumping to conclusions about whether or not you care, I'd actually like to find out what's going on? Is there something about when we're setting these meetings up that's making it hard for you to be on time? That's how you deliver feedback rather than, that's the third time that you've arrived late and, you obviously don't care enough, which is what most people think they're doing when they're giving feedback, very poorly given. So constructive feedback, the purpose of constructive feedback is to move into mutual problem solving. And by the way, I'll never use positive and negative feedback. All feedback is data. More data is always better than less data. You know that as a person in technical field. So in fact, in any field, more data is better than less data. Feedback is data, and data is a gift. Same thing applies to giving somebody affirming feedback or complimentary feedback. Most of the time we say, good job, or nice, thank you, which is kind of meaningless. It's a meaningless platitude. Compare that to using the net to say, wow, that's the third time you've handed that report in early and completely and so thoroughly. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And I'm telling you that because if you want more responsibility, I'd love to be able to give you more, but only if you want it. Now compare that to nice job, thanks. So the purpose of affirming feedback using the model, again, staying on your side of the net, is to help somebody leverage their strengths and encourage them to leverage their strengths.
That's super interesting. Can you say more about the affirming feedback? I might have missed that from the, it's because good job, nice. But could you just help me structure that? Because that was super interesting for me.
Yeah. So that's the third time you've handed that report in. Early, before I'd even asked for it. And not only early, but incredibly thorough. You went above and beyond when you did this and this and this on the report. So that's the behavior. That's describe the behavior. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. I can't tell you how grateful I am for that. I couldn't be more pleased that you're part of the team. Those are all feelings. And the intent, I'm telling you this because if you decide you want more responsibilities, I'd love to have a conversation about what further responsibilities you might take on. That's the contrast to nice job.
That's much more powerful. That is, because you got the emotional component, you have the direction that you want to nudge people, and you have the recognition at the start. So that is super interesting. That is, and I'd love to just talk about sort of more tools. So that's one I'll take away from myself. People might be like, why is he taking so long to say that? But I'll see if I can put that into my conversations.
Well, and here's something to think about, Ian. Here's something to think about, which is the giving feedback, constructive feedback. First of all, you might have had more experience doing that at Lit and Touchy Feely. Second of all, you might have then used it a lot more. So, that's already embedded in your MO. But also, when we're going to give constructive feedback, we tend to sometimes think we need to be a little more thoughtful and a little bit more, thoughtful. Not necessarily careful, but thoughtful. When we give somebody affirming feedback or complimentary feedback, we don't think we need to think twice about it. Because who's going to be upset when you say, great job? But what we don't realize is that we've left all the power of using the model on the table. And the more you use the model in both settings, the better you'll get at it. And the more you'll start to think that way. So not only is it a skill in terms of something to take away, but it's a mental model, a belief system, that implies that you truly see it as a gift, that there's data. Nobody knows how good a job I'm doing as a manager than the person that I'm managing. How often do managers give the people that they're managing an opportunity to tell them how well they're feeling managed? Not very often.
Could you say more about that? So that's another example. That's an example of sort of eliciting feedback. So it's like, hey, So can you talk a little about how do you set up that space, that trust, so that not only you're able to give feedback, we talked about that a little bit, how do you structure to get the right sort of feedback back?
So now that you know the model, even if somebody gives you feedback and they're over the net, you can recognize it as over the net. Somebody says, you obviously don't care. Now, the first thing that might happen when somebody says that to you and you don't know anything, you haven't had the benefit of our conversation, is you're like, what are you talking about? Of course I care. How dare you say I don't care? That's not going to generate a productive conversation. Instead, wow, I must be doing something that has left you with the impression that I don't care. Would you mind telling me a little bit more about what it is that I'm doing? And that now you describe, well, you saunter in late and you never say you're sorry. Okay. And how does that make you feel? Well, I told you, it makes me feel you don't care. I hear that's your assumption, but I'm wondering what the feeling is, because I don't care is not a feeling. That you feeling that I don't care is actually not a feeling. Are you feeling angry? Are you feeling disappointed? Are you feeling, so I might give them an opportunity. I've known people who in organizations who then say, you know what? This is why we trained everybody on learning about the net. And now the shortcut is, you know what? That was over the net. Help me understand what it is that I did and how did it make you feel, and let's move into problem solving. So the more you've got a system, whether it's a family system, I mean, my kids and my husband learned about this since my kids were really little. By the way, little kids this comes very naturally to them. And then we socialize it out of them. You know, my 3-year-old and my 5-year-old are playing, and my 3-year-old says to my 5-year-old, you know, you keep picking the game and I don't like that, so I pick the next game. That's totally on her side of the net. She doesn't say, you're trying to lord it over me because you're the big brother, you know, who made you king, who put you in charge. No, you're doing this, I don't like it. And by the way, unless I pick the next game, I'm not playing. Totally on her side of the net. So then, you know, they finish playing what they're playing. He says, okay, now we're going to play dominoes. I think this story's in the book. Now we're going to play dominoes. She says, no, I said I pick the next game. I'm going to play Candyland. He says, I don't want to play Candyland. She says, okay, I'll be in my room when you're ready to let me pick the next game. You can come get me. So she goes off. He comes in. I've overheard all this. And he comes in the kitchen and he says, Mommy, she won't play with me. I said, I'm sorry, honey, that's not what I heard. She was very clear. She said, if you want to play together, then she gets to choose every other time. Now he goes down the hall and says, okay, we can play Candyland, but can we play dominoes after? She's like, yeah, we'll take turns. Now they play the rest of the afternoon taking turns. Now they're 3 and 5 years old, by the way. Maybe 4 and 6. Maybe 4 and 6. But they were little. And so the problem is those lessons are not reinforced. And what's worse, they're socialized right out of them, because by the time they get to middle school and high school, they are all about making attributions and imputing motives and thinking they know why the other person's doing what they're doing. By the time they get into business, those lessons are really long gone. And now they've got to be retrained to stay on their side of the net.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's a fantastic example, and you sort of see the difference. I think some of the tools we talked about, like you can kind of go into situations, you can see things in a very different way. When you think about so we've, you know, the folks at Stanford, 80% of us had this training, and then do you have data on like what holds us back? Like, is it curriculum? We kind of forget about it. We get in the workplace. We get, you know, we have a bad experience sharing our feelings, and then like that's the last time we'll ever do it again. Like, yeah. What are how does it sort of play out, and what are some of the barriers to actually making some of these methods work?
So early on, especially, you know, while you're still at Stanford, you're embedded in a community where it's a community of practice. Everybody continues to, and you can tell always, students can always tell who's already taken Touchy Feely and who hasn't, because those that have taken Touchy Feely actually start using it in all their relationships. But then you graduate, and then you go out into a world where you're embedded in a world where very few people know this. By the way, I believe with every fiber of my being, Ian, that if we equipped more human beings on this planet with these skills, we wouldn't just have more functional teams and stronger organizations. We'd have more robust communities. We'd have more functional families. We'd have, God forbid, a more functional government. But, you know, the fact is that we need a critical mass of human beings on the planet equipped with this. Because what happens is you graduate, you end up in a system where this is very rare, and you kind of don't have anybody else reinforcing it. If you decide that you're going to be a champion, maybe you get lucky and somebody decides, you know, oh, this is kind of cool, teach me. And now maybe you've got an ally and a kindred spirit. Maybe you end up thinking about introducing your team to it and your team gets bought in. Maybe not. The less you use it, the more it atrophies. It's like a muscle. You don't use it, you lose it. That's one reason. And so that's one big challenge. The other one is that you're right. You might have an experience that doesn't go quite the way you wanted it to go. And now, you know, what we do is we overlearn. It's like, I think it was Mark Twain who said, a cat doesn't sit on a hot stove twice, but it never sits on a cold stove again either, right? We overlearn. Oops, that didn't work. I'm not doing that again. So that's another thing that people learn in Touchy Feely and in Lit is it doesn't always go perfectly the first time. But because you're in an environment where the goal is to learn how to get better and better at it, then you stick with it and you learn how to repair one that went awry. And you learn how to, and that, that's something, the higher up you are in an organization, the more you get to dictate the culture of the organization. You've probably found this in your own organization. The more likely it is that more people are going to engage with each other in this way, because it's part of the culture you've built, part of the value system that you've built. So one of the reasons I find leaders in tech, as much as I adored my Stanford students, one of the reasons I find my leaders in tech ventures so much more satisfying is that those are all CEO founders and now executives of these companies, and pretty soon the next level of managers. And they are going right back into their workplaces, and they're doing this. They're not having to wait 10 years till they've gotten somewhere in an organization where they feel empowered enough to bring it to the organization. And they're going back and they're teaching it to their executive teams, or they're having all their executive teams like you. Enough of a critical mass of executives go through it so that they bring it back to the organization. And that's the way that, the motto at the GSB used to be change lives, change organizations, change the world. Well, that's how we do that. That's how we change lives, organizations, and the world. But you're right also that there are barriers. And the farther out you are from being able to implement what you learned in situ, in your organization, the harder it's going to be to hang on to it. It's another reason that we wrote the book, because what we were hoping is we would make it easier for all of those thousands and thousands of GSB alums who remembered, oh, this was a pretty good thing, to have a resource where if they wanted to at least bring it to their team, they would have a place to start.
Excellent. Thank you, Carole. That's fantastic. So this is so just the book again is Connect: Building Exceptional Relationships with Family, Friends, and Colleagues. So excited to have you here. Oh, you got a copy. Perfect. Thank you. So we'll definitely share that in the show notes.
15 languages.
Oh, wow. Okay, perfect.
This one's the French edition over here.
It's got to feel amazing.
It's very cool. The other thing that we have not talked about at all, but is also perhaps useful, is Carole Robin AI. So if you go to carolrobin.ai and you ask it, so I'm really struggling with a colleague who's doing X or Y, what should I do? Carole Robin AI will give you, the only thing Carole Robin AI has been fed is everything that I've ever written. The book, my papers, lecture notes, podcast notes. So you're going to get a Carole Robin response. If you go to ChatGPT, which is, and say, what would Carole Robin say about X or Y? It'll be about 60% correct. So, and Carole Robin AI online, the app is free for the first 6 months. So there's no reason not to go try it. And, again, it's like having me in your pocket, right? Or the students, I used to say, it's like having little Carole on your shoulder, because you can't tell, but I'm all 4 feet 11 of me. That's not a very large person. So I always used to say, think a little Carole on your shoulder, not a big stretch. But that's another great resource. Or you're like, what were the 3 realities again? Or because that's the other thing that happens. Another barrier is you forget a piece of it, and now you're afraid that you don't understand it fully enough. So now you're afraid to use it because maybe you're not going to use it right. Maybe it's going to create an even bigger problem. There's all kinds of resources now for you to just quickly get a reminder.
Excellent. So carolrobin.ai, we've got the book. Is there places to follow you on social media?
LinkedIn.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll make sure we post that as well.
Yeah, and it's just Carole Robin LLC. Don't try to connect with me through the Leaders in Tech website. Feel free to connect with me at Carole Robin LLC. And by the way, I'm happy you won't be able to connect with me because I've got it set up so that you can't just randomly connect with me and try to sell me a million things. But given your audience, I doubt that that's why they'd want to connect with me. So I'll give you my email address because you'll need it in order to connect with me on LinkedIn, which is Carole Robin, CAROLE, Robin, ROBIN, LLC @gmail.com. And then that'll give you an opportunity to connect with me on LinkedIn. And we're just going to trust that nobody in your audience is going to try to connect with me and either sell me something or try to get me to answer some exceedingly complicated question for free.
Carole, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. This was super excellent and learned a ton, and it was a great refresher, and it just brings back lots of really great tools and memories. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. I had a really good time. As I've said at the very beginning, anytime that I get an opportunity to do anything that feels like teaching or giving somebody else an opportunity to learn, being a conduit for learning, I guess is a better way for me to describe what is deeply satisfying to me, is is a wonderful opportunity. So I thank you as well.
Thanks so much for listening. If you like this content, please join our LinkedIn group. Please thumbs up, please comment, please subscribe. We'd love to bring more of this content to you.